Welcome to Trials, Tales and Trails, the new and potentially short-lived podcast loosely focused on the pharmaceutical clinical research and drug development industry. That's the trials part of the title. Every few weeks, and note the specifically unspecific commitment, we'll be bringing you a new and hopefully interesting guest to tell their story, give their views, and generally have a chinwag about what they're up to. That's the tales. And trails, well, those of you just listening won't get the visual, but if you're watching the video feed, you may be wondering why I'm sitting in a van. This is my Volkswagen camper van. It may be compact, but it's the only space I have with carpeted walls and ceilings. Hopefully that's going to help the audio. We generally don't have a big planned out agenda. Yep, that may well be obvious, and nobody's paying to be on. We may have sponsors further down the line, if anyone listens anyway, and we'll be aiming to produce podcasts that last around 30 to 45 minutes. Why? That's apparently the average commute, and around the time that most people can run a 5K. Perhaps not me. So feel free to listen when you're driving, jogging, travelling, or walking the dog. Maybe we'll even bore you to sleep at night. So why am I saying we? Well, I'll be joined by my talented and long-time friend and erstwhile colleague, Chris Wells, for, if not all of, then most of these podcasts. You'll meet him in the first episode. So, episode 1, have we got a treat for you? That's a rhetorical question, and the answer is yes. Look out on socials, I feel too old to be saying that, for our chat with Kate Groff, Chief Nursing Officer at AA startup FirstHx. Find out how they're revolutionising patient-clinician interactions, and also why the FBI will be listening to this podcast. I think we're live. Yeah, look, we're live. Good stuff. Kate Groff, welcome. Brilliant to see you and to speak to you again. Thanks for joining us on Trials, Tales and Trails. You're the first guest, hopefully of many, really interesting people that I've met over the years. And Kate, I thought you'd be perfect to bring on. Quick intro to Chris Wells, my colleague and friend.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andy. Yeah, Kate, great to meet you.
I'm honored to be here for your first podcast. It's very exciting to be your first official guest. Thank you for having me.
A little bit about Kate from my point of view, and then Kate, you can give the true version. Kate and I worked together for only about 9 months at a startup relatively recently. And Kate is one of those people that I think when you meet, you feel like you've known her for a long time. I think, Kate, you and I sort of hit it off straight away. We're kindred spirits in many ways. We sort of have similar backgrounds in terms of family, etc. But I think the thing that struck me about Kate was that she is just hugely tenacious. She's a doer. She's probably the busiest person that I know. And, you know, that will probably come out when Kate explains to you all a little bit about herself and what she's doing. So over to you, Kate.
Perfect. So I, by background, am a nurse. I started off as a second career to nursing, so a little bit of an unusual start. I played around with different majors in college, wasn't really sure kind of what my path was going to be, and then sort of serendipitously ended up in nursing school and worked in the pediatric bone marrow transplant unit for several years before deciding to go back to become a nurse practitioner and focus on pediatrics. And I worked in pediatric critical care for almost 15 years, and then made a pivot into the innovation space working at startups. I worked with you, Andy, at a startup based in London, and now I work for a startup called FirstHx based in Canada. And I also attend graduate school to get my doctorate in nursing at Johns Hopkins University.
And not just that, right, Kate?
Well, yes, I'm busy. I'm involved in a nursing society called SANCL, which is focused on innovation in nursing. And as part of that, I get to be involved in different committees, including a committee that's advising a subcommittee to the UN. So we get to focus on, some really great global projects that's getting kicked off right now. And really the focus is on bringing nursing to the global community and really showcasing what we can do as a community of nurses. So it's been a lot of great opportunities that have come my way. I never kind of thought I would end up in the startup community coming out of nursing school. That wasn't one of the opportunities that was presented. So it's been great to kind of see how my career has evolved over time, and really just to help younger nurses realize that a lot that you learn in nursing school can translate into the startup environment, the business environment, clinical trials. Whatever you're really passionate about, you can apply your love of patient care to a lot of different avenues.
And apart from all of that sort of stuff, you've got 3 or 4 little people there. Well, there's one big person, but 3 little people that rely on you as well, right?
That's right. I have 3 little boys, 3, 5, and 8.
Wow. How many hours in the day do you have in your home location then? Because that's more than a 24-hour job, all that. That's insane.
Yeah.
I'm very lucky. My work family is very supportive of my different endeavors, and I have a great support at home with my friends and my family. So I'm able to accomplish a lot in the 24 hours that everyone else has in the world.
Tell you what, tell us a little bit about First History, who they're, when you look at the name written down, right, is FirstHx, an AI solution for patients' medical history.
That's right. So we're a clinician-led startup. We're made up of physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners, really focusing on empowering the patients to communicate their medical histories to their healthcare team. And so we accomplish that through harnessing AI and really just trying to empower not just the patient, but also the clinician, and allowing the clinician to focus on the patient instead of on the documentation aspect that we know is everywhere in healthcare. Time is a real commodity in healthcare. And so anything we can do to increase the provider's time with the patient, the better quality of care that patient's going to get at the end of the day. And right now, as it stands, about 60 to 80% of the patient visit time is spent on just collecting the history. So you can imagine if you're spending that much time collecting the history, that doesn't leave the patient much time to really discuss what matters to them, which is the plan of care, the education aspect, discussing treatment options. And so many patients go home feeling like they didn't really accomplish what they set out to accomplish in that patient visit. So what we're trying to do is instead to capture that history ahead of time and do the documentation seamlessly so that the provider can really focus on the patient and not on documenting the visit.
Wow. I mean, when you look at it, when you say it like that in those encapsulated sentences, you can 100% see the benefit even at that stage. So, if this technology is, I guess it's already been rolled out, right? It's already in use.
Correct. So it's the startup's based in Canada. We are now rolling out in the US as well as in the Middle East, and
Wow.
quickly kind of scaling globally, given all of the interest in how you use a tool like this to really engage patients and empower patients in their care. And really, we're seeing this transition from asking patients, what is the matter? Why are you here? To what matters to you? Because that's what patients really want to answer. They want to say, this is my goal for the visit. This is why I'm here. And how do we meet those expectations and improve the quality of care across the board?
And I bet many of those answers that come back potentially contradict what people think, what natural assumption would be the drivers, and it's not, you just start to think about the efficiency boost that you can start to open up to particular, country locations, particular studies. And obviously the experience for patients must be infinitely better when they're able to use time to a better advantage. Amazing.
Right, because everybody wants more time with their provider to discuss their concerns, to feel like they're being heard. And providers on their end, they're people too. They want time to do charting and get their work done and go home to their families. And so you have to be sympathetic to both sides of the coin and realize that if we can improve time efficiency for patients, we're also improving what providers are experiencing, and we can help with, provider burnout and nurse practitioners, physicians, physician associates who are burnt out on the documentation piece of healthcare and just they don't have the time in the day to get it all accomplished.
Yeah, you can absolutely see that. So how is it available to patients? Is it an app-based technology?
Correct. So it's a software solution that providers, health systems will purchase, and then it's made available to all of their patients.
Wow.
So basically, how it works is when you're coming in for an appointment, you'll get a text message that will prompt you to walk through your medical history, but it's not a form. So it's not, everybody hates forms, right? So
Yeah.
you're not
Yeah.
clicking through, answering questions. It's an adaptive medical history. So each answer is based on each question, excuse me, is based on your previous answer, so that it's really mimicking the medical interview process and gathering the correct data to really inform your care once you get to your provider's appointment.
So is that the AI element, or is the AI element afterwards?
So the AI element is the adaptive medical history part. So how it works is we write the questions with subject matter experts. So what we
Okay.
do is, say you have an expert on breast cancer. We would go to a leading breast cancer expert and work with them to develop the evidence-based questions that they feel are the best questions to elicit a correct history. And so our long-term vision is really to make these questions available to everyone across the globe, so that patients are really getting access to the best evidence-based questions.
And again, it's a very personalized experience, because it's going to go in different directions according to that, personal situation. That is an amazing concept. It must be a lot of fun for you, as you say, moving out of one kind of startup entity into another, but with like huge potential benefits for so many stakeholders. That's got to be a lot of fun for you. Rewarding.
Yeah, it is. I think there's been a common thread throughout my nursing
Yeah.
career, and it's really been focusing on patients. When I was in the
Yeah.
hospital, I did bedside research on including patients and families in rounds in the pediatric ICU. And instead of running through the hospital as quickly as possible in the morning, really getting families out into the hallway, involving them in their care, hearing their voice. And that was, 15 years ago. At the time, it was very uncommon to treat patients that way. And now, thankfully, I can say a lot of children's hospitals, that's really standard of care. And so I think we're seeing the same transformation happening in digital health, in clinical trials, really moving away from making decisions for patients and instead really partnering with patients to make sure that we're meeting their expectations and their needs.
It doesn't surprise me, Kate, that even back then you were sort of on that cutting edge, because I think I've always seen you as a bit of a trailblazer, and I think you're obviously still doing that now with FirstHx. So really cool. I mean, just off the top of my head now, I can see how this could be really adaptive into clinical research, because everything that you're explaining there is part of that kind of consent stroke assent process.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of talk about e-consent nowadays, what it is, what it isn't. There's actually a initiative that's happening over here in Europe via FPA and some other organizations, where what they're trying to do is to identify what e-consent isn't. And actually, it's kind of transpired through many of the discussions that anyone who's involved in providing any information about a clinical trial or recruitment for a clinical trial is in some way involved in that consent assent process.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's electronic, then by definition it is in some way on the e-consent. I think a lot of people tend to think it's the capturing of the electronic signature, or that kind of process, and actually everything before that as well. I can usually see how this could be adaptive. I can see how it would shorten screening appointments, because there's so much there that you can actually do prior to that. This is me extrapolating, but then that also to me gives you the opportunity to identify those patients or groups that might be more vulnerable to or susceptible to discontinuing in that clinical study at some stage in the future. So if there is some sort of artificial intelligent element that could be brought through on that, and that might be somebody listening that thinks, hey, we have something that does that, or FirstHx might be considering going down that road in the future, but absolutely can see the benefits straight away. When it comes, let's get back to sort of your passion, Kate, in terms of pediatrics. Can you see that there's a way that this is going to improve, maybe even revolutionize sort of pediatric medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. I really joined the team because I love pediatrics. And I think there's so much room to improve pediatric healthcare and really invest in children and families, and making sure that we really treat them as, as important as they are, because children grow up to be adults. And so the more we invest in childhood and caring for them when they're young, the better outcomes they will have as adults. And so FirstHx recently rolled out our Peds History product, which is focused on pediatric patients and families, so that families and guardians can fill out the history ahead of the child's visit. So you can think about the many implications of that. So primary care, urgent care, subspecialty care, because any of us that have children have been to an urgent care or emergency room visit, and we know the sooner we can get out of that waiting room, back into the room, see the provider, and get home, the better. Nobody wants to sit there with a screaming or sick child, answering the same questions over and over and over again. And so if we can be more time efficient and really allow the families to answer the questions in the comfort of their own home, when they can have a sane thought and not have children with them when you can hardly, hear yourself think, we get a much more accurate history, which is also extremely important, because I know so many times I've gone home when my child was sick and thought, oh, I didn't tell him about that illness. I didn't tell him about that steroid course, things that can really change your treatment that you just forget. And so if you can answer your history when you're calm, when you can think clearly, you're going to get a better history to your provider.
Yeah. I just, even thinking now, obviously finding out more about it, just the quality of the data must be just so much better. You've got, exactly as you said, you haven't got that kind of compromised situation of so many pressures, issues. I've got 2 children. I think, you guys have got more than me. So my hat's off to you. But I think, really needy times trying to juggle their immediate welfare with filling forms out, which is so key. And it's going to be such a, lay the pathway of how effective treatment's going to be, taking the pressure off, being able to control some of that process remotely. Again, it's a fantastic kind of benefit. And again, the data that comes back, and when you're able to kind of assess it, actually gauge how productive it's been, you can change the process. Directives to recruitment more inclusively. If you've got hospital locations that don't have an abundance of language capabilities, you run the risk of some of that information being also kind of compromised. Whereas if you're sending this out at a nice, calm kind of pace, I can just see benefits from this from all different aspects of, clinical to regular treatment.
That's right. And the way we collect those questions and get these experts to really weigh in on how best to ask a question and get that information can really benefit everyone. So no matter where you live, if you live in a rural area, if you live in an underserved area, you still get access to those best questions. And so how that can play out is you can get early diagnosis and treatment for conditions that otherwise would have been missed.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's a real... I think you're getting there to the crux of some of the benefits even now. And I'd say maybe I'll say that it's the early days of AI. Okay, I know that AI has been influencing our lives, whether we know it or like it for years now. But I think we're now starting to get to the point that you can see some of the benefits. As you've said, Chris, okay, you've made you've explained some of the benefits really, really well there. But I think that some of those things that Chris was drawing out, things like natural language processing, using AI in the right way to identify certain trends in electronic healthcare records, to be able to spot, potential future problems like propensity to, a certain condition or disease, or indeed rare diseases. So, like you said, Kate, I think, everybody who's had a child, we all have our sort of challenges. We've all been sat there in what you guys call the emergency room, what we call accident and emergency, where you've been in that situation where you're almost not able to think straight, and even sometimes with longer term conditions. And I think it's really, really, it's really great to see that there's some of this innovation is now getting the the recognition, the use, and obviously the funding that it needs. In terms of how your doctorate fits in with that, is there a crossover to what you're doing at FirstHx and your schooling?
Yes, very much so. My focus for my doctorate is patient engagement in digital health. So, really partnering with patients to create the patient-facing technologies of the future. So, how do you really do that? How do you make it meaningful and really involve patients early on from discovery all the way through commercialization? And how do you accomplish that at an early stage startup that is cash strapped and time strapped and people strapped? So, how do you really manage that? And so, a lot of my focus is on creating a roadmap for FirstHx on how we can start to really engage patients in the technologies that we develop, use patient friendly language. I would love to see a patient and family advisory council. I think we can take a lot of cues from the clinical trial industry and the way that the talk around clinical trials has evolved over the last 5-10 years. And I think that's starting to move more into digital health. And how do we take some of the lessons learned and really apply them to our industry and how we develop technology?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so it's how to break silos as well. And if you look at kind of the regulatory landscape from country to country, certain things have to be conducted very differently. You mentioned e-consent. There's certain countries where it's hugely effective. There's others where it's just not possible. But the lessons learned, human nature is the same pretty much everywhere around the world. And if you can share some of that intelligence and feedback and kind of parent opinion and so on, again, all it's going to do is actually benefit parents of children of all sorts of conditions anywhere in the world will invariably have similar kind of headaches. So how long has the company been in motion for then? Because again, it must be really relatively early days and you must be so excited about what's going to come back.
So it was started in 2017 and it's grown since that time through obviously the pandemic. And then now our team is really moving towards a global scale just based on the momentum of AI and everything, all the hype around AI. We really want to show that we're the real deal. We're not the hype. We really want to create a clean data set that really is going to help transform the future of healthcare and really put the power into the patient's hands and really use an underutilized resource. There's no reason that the clinician has to control the narrative of a patient's history. We should really be empowering the patients to understand their history and know how to communicate that. And that's challenging. Even as a clinician myself, I take notes ahead of my medical appointments so that I don't forget, because it's so easy once you're there and they're doing your vital signs to completely forget, oh, I went to the emergency room 2 years ago, or I, took this medicine and then changed to that medicine. The timeline becomes very fuzzy because all of us have competing demands for, what we're trying to remember. And so if we can capture that ahead of time, I think it's a lot more effective.
You said earlier that your career path into what you're doing now has been probably maybe slightly unconventional. And obviously you're looking to sort of throw light on to other nurses and people who have similar backgrounds to yours as to what can potentially be done. But you weren't always considering nursing as your primary career path, were you, Kate?
I was not. So I famously changed majors in college 8 times. So for anyone that's not sure what they want to do, I can definitely empathize. I, at one point, was the president of the pre-med society and the pre-law society at the same time. I was that confused. And so I really played around with different majors. I didn't know. I had a lot of different interests. I loved healthcare, but I was squeamish around needles and blood. And so I wasn't really sure. I did pre-law, pre-med. I was interested in political science. When I was getting ready to graduate, I started looking into different graduate programs, trying to decide what to do, and was very, very unsure. And I had no one to really say, you should do this or that. And so I was basically interviewing for anyone that would interview me. I would interview just to test it out and see if it seemed like a good fit or not.
I mean, I think though, you got to take that and you've got to look at the fact that you did that, somebody who is very focused. And I think, the learning point for many people is that it's okay.
That's right.
Changing a career or a choice is okay, because I think if you're tenacious and you're driven and you're willing to learn, and as you've said, take advice, that can set you on the right path. I asked the question in a slightly leading way because Kate once told me a story about a trial she had with a kind of non-conventional, certainly to us over here based in the UK, a non-conventional organisation. Do you mind if I ask you to elaborate on that, Kate?
I think I know what you're referring to. I believe it was my junior year of college. I became very, very interested in international studies, political science, criminology. I actually majored in international studies. I did not major in nursing initially. And so I had a lot of interest in the FBI, and they had an internship program where you could interview and come on as a student, which is hilarious looking back because I'm the most talkative person, least secretive. I can't keep anything to myself, but I signed up. I went to the interview day. They did the interview. They didn't laugh in my face. They just did the interview. I did not get a call back. No shock to anyone. But yes, I had that experience thinking that I could possibly work for the FBI, but it did not work out for me. But I have thought about it many times. I thought about becoming a nurse practitioner, doing that. There's many different avenues that you can play in that agency, but I did not end up pursuing it. But it was one of the many things I looked into when I was in college, trying to figure out what to do with my life.
I just admire the fact you're covering all possible bases out there. That's inspirational. That's amazing. Look, I think, you look at you just look at kind of healthcare as an industry. The number of companies that were no way connected to it. I'm not talking startups, I'm talking established organizations. That the wave of technology companies moving into healthcare, and it's not. I think that ability to diversify and see where there's opportunity, not just from a commercial perspective, but to see where there's opportunity, that their experiences, their infrastructure, their kind of skill sets can benefit other areas. And I think, I think it's a huge positive. You're always open. I wouldn't rule out the FBI, never say never. Who knows what happens next year or beyond? But no, that's a really impressive story. I love it.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
think startups really allow you to wear different hats, right? There's so many different things you can do. And when you don't have a large team, there's a lot of opportunity to try on different things and see what fits. And so for me in particular, it makes a lot of sense because I've always liked business, graphic design, healthcare, all different things. And so it really allows you to do that and really learn in each of those environments and pivot based on your learning. And so I think coming to nursing after exploring all those different avenues, I was pretty darn sure I wanted to work in healthcare.
Yeah. I mean, also thinking kind of, on the subject of AI, where we are right now versus where it's going to be in 5 years, what's going to, the evolution of wearable technologies, for example, it's fascinating to know how far things are going to be advanced, how ecosystems will be kind of, what the setup's going to be, and every new platform you look at, how can it effectively integrate with other existing platforms? I see that there's huge potential. So to be in a position where you're kind of at the head of a curve and you're seeing areas where technology and a slightly different way of thinking can make big benefits, I think it's going to be a exciting next few years in this industry for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, there was, as far as I remember, talking to you over sort of many phone calls and face to face, I believe that there was a moment in your career that kind of made you take a little bit of stock about your life, your safety, working in the environment that you did, sort of on the coalface. And if you don't mind, it's I'll just ask you to perhaps elaborate on that experience. I think to what I'm referring. To me, it's very interesting. I think it's interesting what kind of catalyst that was for you. But I think it also puts into perspective some of the real dangers that healthcare professionals, including nurses that are looking after people for their job, are facing in their day-to-day work. Would you mind elaborating on that for us?
Sure. Yeah, I read a recent study that was talking about the number of nurses and physicians that have been assaulted while on the job. And I think most nurses have had some sort of experience, even me coming from pediatrics, where you were attacked by a patient, something happened, got out of control, you got hurt at work. And I think a lot more people are being open about their experiences in healthcare and not always feeling safe at work. And for me, I think it was about 10, 12 years ago, I was working at a hospital and there was an active shooter situation where a man came in. He killed the 2 security guards on the hospital and then just went on a rampage around the hospital. And we were pediatrics, and so very female heavy, with very vulnerable children. And so it was a very scary situation to think that at work you could potentially lose your life. And so I was very lucky in that we had someone in our unit that was able to take down the shooter and stop the craziness, because otherwise I think it would have just continued. We just didn't have any protection. And so I think it's important to make sure that healthcare providers feel safe at work and feel like their lives are valued just as much as patients. And specifically in the US, this is all over the news, right? We hear about shootings in the emergency room, providers getting attacked. And I think we need to bring more light to that subject and make sure that providers really feel safe when they enter a hospital and that we protect them.
I know, Kate, that you're very modest, but I think the role that you played in that whole situation, to me, was pretty key to that being resolved as quickly as possible with us. I don't want to sound that I'm saying this wrongly here, but as little loss of life as possible. Do you mind taking us, and again, you don't need to mention any sort of organizations or names, but do you mind taking us through a little bit about what happened in those moments?
Sure. So I think as part of working as a nurse in critical care, you learn to really be calm in very intense situations and think through the best steps to take. And for me, I was charge nurse that night when I was alerted that there was an active shooter situation who was riding up and down the elevator. And like I said, I was the charge nurse. So most of the nurses on the unit were around, 22 up to 25, very young. And so I really felt responsible for not just the nurses, but the patients and also the patients' parents, because the unit where I worked, the parents had to be at the bedside. And I thought through what to do. I wasn't sure what to do. I was, obviously very scared. And then I realized that one of our parents was a law enforcement officer. And so I quickly woke him up and he was able to exit the unit and track down the shooter. And so that was how that situation was resolved, thankfully. But afterwards, I was just, so grateful that he had been there, because honestly, it would have been a much worse situation. And so I think as nurses, we just learn to kind of be calm in those situations. I think my personality is to worry about small little things, but then when big things happen, I can really think clearly and logically to a solution. So yes, it was a very intense situation, but I'm very thankful that it didn't end up worse than it did.
And thank goodness, listen, that you were there and that you were calm in those moments. And of course, that there was a law enforcement officer there to take care of the situation. That experience must have been, even though you were calm about it, was that something that influenced your decision to move away from that kind of frontline care?
No, it actually influenced my decision to continue on with clinical care and really pursue an advanced degree. So I ended up, it kind of combined my favorite things at the time, right? It combined healthcare and criminology all in one. And so it really fueled me to continue on in clinical care, because at the end of the day, I love the patients. I love taking care of the patients, and I love the families, because in pediatrics, if you don't love the families, then you shouldn't be in pediatrics. And so I went on to get my master's degree after that and practiced for many more years until I transitioned out. My transition really occurred when my youngest son, who was 1.5 at the time, went to critical care during the pandemic. He didn't have COVID. He had a very common respiratory illness, rhinovirus, but because of his age and risk factors, he ended up in critical care. And so I kind of guess, circling back, my research that had been done at the bedside on patient and family centered care in the ICU really came full circle when I went from being a clinician in the ICU to the parent of a child in the ICU, and really going through that experience and the challenges that came along with that, especially during the pandemic when you could only have one parent. I really saw another side of healthcare, and I really saw what an advantage I had as a clinician, that I understood what was going on compared to the other families. And it was still incredibly traumatic. And thankfully, my son recovered. He's doing great. But that scenario really changed the trajectory of my career, and is what really sparked my passion for innovation and really trying to improve healthcare from the outside instead of just internally within a healthcare system. And that's how I met Andy, working at a startup focused on pediatric digital health.
Absolutely. And, Kate, I can completely agree with you there. I think that through my individual experiences of healthcare, having kids, relatives that were ill, I found myself more and more reinforced to me that everybody who's sick really needs an advocate, because although the doctors, the nurses, the healthcare professionals, and I actually think that everybody involved in the whole healthcare system, they do want to do good. They do want to make people better, right? They don't think we're disputing that at all. But the challenges of the job, the funding, etc., sometimes make it very difficult. And I think that patients without an advocate, somebody being there for them, pushing for certain things, it's so difficult. And I also think that one of the sort of positive things to have happened in the clinical research arena, as you saying, I think this is happening more in the healthcare side now, but patient advocacy has really come to the fore. The amount of patient advocacy groups that Chris, you and I have sort of talked to or been involved with, it, even on the edges. In the last few years, you really see that influence starting to come through, I think, now in clinical trials, in the way that clinical trial designers actually organize themselves and design trials. And I think it's, that one of the big things for me, I guess, when I'm thinking about the future of the whole healthcare industry, including clinical trial. The biggest challenge facing the industry, is there something that you think it is, the biggest thing that we need to address right now? Is it a number of small elements? I mean, I'll let you speak, but I'd really like to get your insight on what you think. And the reason I'm asking that is because what I want you to do, it's almost the last part of this conversation, is to ask a question, if you wouldn't mind, that we can ask the next person that we interview.
Sure. So I think it goes back to the focus of my research, which is patient engagement across the healthcare ecosystem. How do we effectively engage patients? And, there's a lot of large nonprofits, the World Health Organization, that are all weighing in on the best way to do that. The World Health Organization has a paper on digital health that says that it should be people-centered. So They specifically didn't say patient-centered. They said people-centered, meaning patients, clinicians who are people, healthcare organizations, which are composed of people, because everyone within the system wants to do the best thing for the patient. I think that no clinician goes into healthcare without the patient at the core of why they did that. But like you said, given circumstances in healthcare, demands on their time, demands for documentation, you can lose sight of that. And so how do we get back to people at the center? So patients, providers, healthcare organizations, pharma, how do we make sure that we're meeting the needs of all the different stakeholders? Yeah. And so I think my question would be, how are you meaningfully engaging patients and really, meeting the demands and needs of patients so that they feel heard and seen within the healthcare landscape?
Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate the chance to speak with both of you. And I know that you both share, it's like preaching to the choir. You both share my same sentiments regarding patients, but it's great to talk to you about, all the different needs that patients have and really allowing patients to drive their own narrative. So whether you're a clinician or you're a patient without any healthcare experience, how can you really drive your own narrative regarding your healthcare?
I think that there's a couple of takeaways from this discussion. Exactly what you just said. I think the ownership of your own health data is huge. If we can encourage that from patients, then hopefully we can make our industry, the clinical trial industry, more diverse as well. And then I also think that in the future there is possibly an opportunity for patients to then monetize that and be able to use their own health data for good, but also to potentially earn themselves money if that is something that is acceptable. The other takeaway that I'll take from this conversation is that the FBI, if you're listening, and it's probably the CIA that actually listens, isn't it? So of course they're listening.
Probably.
But CIA, if you two agencies are talking, please do pass on the information to the FBI that Kate Groff is available and would love to come and help in some capacity. And that's if you can prize her away from the UN. So, Kate, listen,
that's right.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. You're the inaugural guest, and we'll forever be thankful for that. Thanks for being our guinea pig. And listen, all the very best in your career. I know it's going to be a huge success. All the very best with FirstHx. Sounds like it's an exciting path. And again, on behalf of myself and Chris, thanks for joining us in the campervan on Trials, Tales and Trails.
Absolutely.
Thank you both so much.
That was Kate Groff, Chief Nursing Officer at FirstHx. You can check them out at FirstHx.com. Thanks to Kate and to Chris for your time. This and future episodes can be found on your favourite podcast app or at trialstalesandtrails.com, all one word. You can drop us a line there if you want to get involved, suggest a guest, or even sponsor the podcast. The views expressed by all participants are our own, and not necessarily that of our employers, past, present, or future. Trials, Tales and Trails was written by Andy Thurstan and Chris Wells, and produced by Andy Thurstan.